I indeed count it a blessing to be with you again this evening as we consider things that are going to be eternal in their consequences. We've been studying each night since Sunday night out of the book of Ecclesiastes. Just far as a summary of some of the things that we've looked at thus far in the study, we pointed out that we believe that Solomon is the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes. I know that there is at least in some religious circles, some questions about that, but I believe the evidence is in that Solomon is a writer of the book of Ecclesiastes, perhaps late during his lifetime. As he looked back upon his life, he reflects some of the things that he had observed, and he writes these in the form of a journal. And in this journal, he is pointing out certain things that he sought out to try to find the meaning of life, and try to find what life is all about, and try to find what it is that provides one with happiness and with direction. And after trying a number of things, reaching a conclusion, sort of as a crescendo, as you get to the end of the book, you find that he says, let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. He said, now I'm going to sum up for you very candidly and very, very shortly. I'm going to sum up to you what is the conclusion, and that is we are to fear God and keep His commandments. That is the whole of man. That's what our life here upon the earth is all about. And the reason that he was able to reach that conclusion, and he says it in many places, but according to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 13 and 14, he says this. He said, and I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven, this burdensome task God has given to the sons of man, by which they may be exercised. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed all is vanity. Now notice what he says here. He says not only all is vanity, you remember what that word vanity means. It means, in the context of the book of Ecclesiastes, that which is fleeting, that which is transitory, that which is going to be eliminated one day or another. It's not always going to be that way. Life is transitory, but he also says that it is a grabbing of handfuls of air. He said it's grasping for the wind. It's something that we cannot hold on to. It's something that as we pointed out in the course of this study, it is an illusion. That is, the world promises what it cannot deliver. The things that we see. And you know, the thing about it is, ladies and gentlemen, it seems that many people go through life chasing what is often referred to as that elusive dream. If I could just get, and you could fill in the blank there, if I could just get whatever, I would be happy, I would find the meaning of life, I would be content, and you could go on and on. But that is an illusion. Everything that we seek to have upon this earth, everything that we seek to hoard upon this earth is but a vapor. It's transitory, it's fleeting. It's like trying to grab hold of sunshine and keep sunshine when it gets dark. And you simply cannot do that. And this is what's tragic, my friends. We work and we work and we scrape and we save and we hoard all of these things. And what's going to happen? What's going to happen is we're going to die and we're going to be put in the ground and we're going to deteriorate, and everything that we've worked to have is going to be passed on to somebody else. We're going to leave it to another. And as he said in chapter 2 and verse 19, yet he shall rule over all my labor in which I toiled, in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This is vanity. He said, I don't even know whether this guy's going to be wise or a fool. But you know what? I'm going to leave it to somebody else. I want to tell you, my friends, unless we're viewing life with a biblical perspective, unless we're viewing life the way that God intends for us to view life, and this is what we're trying to emphasize during the course of this study, we're just simply buying into an illusion. We don't even know what it is that we really see. We don't even know what it is that's really real. It's like some of the eye illusions that I have put up before you each evening to just try to drive that point home. You look at things and you kind of, however you look at it, it might look a little differently to this person than it does to that person. Such as the picture that's on the screen behind me. Now, is the cat going up the stairs or is the cat going down the stairs? You see, this is what the world is doing. It's promising you something that you just can't tell, is it real or not? But in fact, when we look at it from a biblical perspective, we know that it is not real. What is it that we see? You take another picture. Is there just trees here, or do you see the outline of a woman's face? What is it you see? You see, this is what the world is doing. It's dangling things there, and we're just not able to tap into what's real. We're seeking that elusive dream. We don't know, as in this picture, which one of these men is the tallest. Which man is tallest? Is it the man on the right, the man in the middle, or the man on the left? You see, this is what the world is doing, ladies and gentlemen. It's showing us something that is not real. And we need to be wise enough, especially God's people. We need to be wise enough to recognize what's real and what isn't. Now, what we want to look at this evening, ladies and gentlemen, is another illusion that people simply buy into. And that illusion that we want to look at this evening is revealed to us in Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verses 10 through 13. If you have your Bibles, read along with me. Ecclesiastes 8, beginning at verse 10. Then I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of holiness, and they were forgotten in the city they had so done. This also is vanity, because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily. Therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Now let's just ponder on that for a moment as we continue reading. Though a sinner does evil 100 times, and his days are prolonged, yet I surely know that it will be well with those who fear God, who fear before Him. But it will not be well with the wicked, nor will he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he does not fear God. You know what we learn from this, ladies and gentlemen, is that, it just seems like that, things are not going to balance out. It just seems as though that, we're going to get away with some things. It just seems as though, we're not going to be held accountable for what it is that we do. And we go through life thinking that. It's like we said the other evening, God doesn't pay every Friday night. God doesn't look at the way that you live your week and say on Friday night, like to get a paycheck from a company, a factory. That God is going to look at you and say, okay, I see what you've done this week, so now it's time to pay up. No. It just seems like that everything just continues on and on the way that it's always been. And so we develop the concept and we develop the attitude that because we seem to have gotten away with it seems as though everything is like it ought to be, continuing on. But what we've got to realize is Solomon is trying to get us to understand there's no such thing as a free lunch. You're not going to get away with what you're doing. Yes, sentence against an evil is not executed speedily, but that doesn't mean that God has forgotten it. There is no such thing as a free lunch. If you doubt me on that, and this is something that people need to understand when they want a free college education, or they want free meals, or they want free this, or free that, free health care. It's not possible. The bill is going to come due. We don't get a free lunch. If you doubt that, free lunch is, maybe we can get a free lunch. Well, let's ask our rodent friend here if there's any such thing as a free lunch. You know what? It looked like a pretty good deal. But you know what? The bill came due. And ladies and gentlemen, the bill always comes due. Oh man, wouldn't it be wonderful if our young people, and maybe some of us older people, if we understood that as well. If we understood that, whatever I do, I'm going to be held accountable for it. Whatever bill I run up, one of these days I'm going to have to pay it. You know what? I just can't get by with all of these things that I think I'm getting by with. The bill always comes due. Think about the things that you see that's advertised. You come into our store. No payment, you don't have to put anything down, no interest, no payment for 6 months. And, you know what? You just spend and you spend and you spend and you spend. And you know what? We do it like drunken sailors, thinking that we're never going to have to pay. But, just buy now. Buy now. But you know what? There's always a pay later. Look at the government. The government has run up a debt, and we sometimes, because the number is so high, we fail to grasp that. More than $19 trillion are owed by our government to foreign entities, to China and other. Ladies and gentlemen, the bill is going to come due one of these days. And it doesn't matter who is elected president. One day that bill is going to come due. And if we thought things were bad in the days of Herbert Hoover and the Great Depression, I'm telling you, the bill is going to come due. And on an individual basis, many people are mortgaging their future and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing with no thought of ever paying the bill off. We get a whole wallet full of credit cards. And we use these credit cards to buy furniture. We use these credit cards to, buy Christmas presents. And some people even use credit cards to go on a vacation. And hobbies. Friend, the bill's going to come due. You're going to have to pay that off one of these days. And sometimes people begin to realize this. They're already swimming in a debt up to their eyes. And they suddenly learn, I'm just unable to pay. I've run up this bill, this debt so much, and it's past due, I'm just not able to pay. And I bought this new car on time, I just put nothing down, and you know what? I have to start paying for that, and I just don't have the money. Well, my friends, let me tell you something. There's no such thing as a free ride. And when we look at this from an economy standpoint, economics, we say, we can destroy our future, and we can destroy the future of our children. But you know what makes this tragic? Is that attitude somehow finds its way into our relationship with God. And we think we can get away with the things that we're doing insofar as God is concerned. And so, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. It is an illusion to believe that there is a free ride, that we're not going to reap what we've sown. Listen to what he says again. Though a sinner does evil 100 times and his days are prolonged, it will not be well. It's not going to continue to be well with the wicked. Sometimes we think that we can just run up a debt of sin and immorality and filth, and we never have to pay. It's as though we're going to get away with it all of our lives. This is lunacy. There are consequences to what we do. We can't run up a debt of sin and just walk away from it any more than we can run up on credit cards and walk away from it. Somebody's going to be held accountable. The soul that sins, it shall die. If we sow to the wind, Hosea said, we will reap the whirlwind. As Moses said in the book of Numbers, be sure your sin will find you out. There's coming a day, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have to pay the price. Paul says it this way in Galatians chapter 6, verses 6 and 7. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. We need to understand that. We're not going to be able to mock God. For whatever a man sows, that shall he also reap. If he sows to the flesh, he will of the flesh reap destruction. This is a truism, my friends. We're going to reap what we have sown. And I have to just tell you, if we continue trying to live without consequences of our folly, you know what's going to happen in this country? If this continues on, we're going to populate this country with fools, thinking that we can get by with what we're doing without suffering the consequences of it. I recognize it may seem as though there are no consequences to our behavior. And the reason, you know what? You got away with it, didn't you? Nobody saw what you were doing. Nobody heard what you said. Nobody's able to read your thoughts. Nobody saw you do what you did. And so you know what? It looks like I got away with it. I can just go on about my merry way. But we got to understand something. There's coming a payday. There's coming a time that we're going to suffer the consequences of the choices that we've made. Paul points out, the wages of sin is death. Romans 6 verse 23. And that is a truism, ladies and gentlemen, and we're not going to avoid that. We're going to suffer the consequences of the choices that we make. Let me illustrate that. Let me illustrate the folly of believing that there is a free ride. Let's talk about, ladies and gentlemen, this thing that I refer to as sexual promiscuity that is running rampant throughout our country, running rampant throughout our society, affecting not only young people but old people as well. And you know, people are living as though you're not going to be held accountable for your sexual promiscuity. Listen to me. That is folly. That is grasping for the wind. That is believing an illusion. My generation, and I'm ashamed to say it, the 1960s generation ushered in what was known sexual revolution, and we're suffering the consequences of that today. Now our society is so swamped in sexual promiscuity that it looks worse than a barnyard. Young people as well as old people are behaving like alcoholics. We're raising young people to tell them, you know what? I understand, Junior, and I understand, Susie, you can't control your urges. And so, you know, you go off to school down here, we're going to teach you how to have safe relationships, sexually speaking, that is. And we're going to show you how to do it, and we want you to practice this safely. We've lost our collective intelligence. All in the world we're doing is pushing young people further and further into sexual promiscuity as though there are no consequences to such behavior as that. The music industry and the movie industry is filled with what we refer to as beautiful people. These personalities and sports figures as well. You know, they openly live together. Some of the sports stars in the NFL and the NBA, they make no bones about it that they may have 4 or 5 children, and they refer to the people that bore those children as my baby's mama. You know, and we look up to those, and our young people look up to them, and they have posters in their bedrooms demonstrating their affection for people like this. This is the culture and the society in which we live. But I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, despite what all the, quote, beautiful people say, there are consequences to this. How many young girls in the church have made a trip down the front aisle, sat down on the front row and confessed, well, I did something that I shouldn't have done. I made a terrible mistake and now I'm suffering the consequences of it. No. You committed sin and you're suffering the consequences for those sins. There are consequences to the choices that we make. Do you realize, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. Do you realize that nearly 41% of all births in America are to unmarried women? Does that not disturb us? What is the church doing? We're burying our heads in the sand and we don't even want preachers to talk about this. This is a problem. We're going to suffer. The bill is coming due. And I'm going to tell you, that which is conceived in the womb is a human being made in the image of God, even though the conception may have been due to fornication. That is another human being living there. And the alternative is not to go out and take the life of that precious little child. Even though there have been millions and millions and millions of children torn from the mother's womb since Roe v. Wade. You think God is going to look upon that and not hold us accountable? There are consequences to sexual promiscuity. There's the consequences of sexually transmitted diseases. Do you realize, ladies and gentlemen, that there are 20 million new STDs diagnosed every single year? Herpes on down. I mean, this is the reality of it. There is no free ride. And beyond that, you know, there's just the shame, or it used to be the shame of just the loss of virginity. God expects us to be pure until the day that we get married. And once you surrender that purity, young man or young woman, you can never get it back. Yes, you may be able to be forgiven and thank God for His grace, but your virginity can never be reclaimed because you surrendered that. And there are consequences. There are consequences. Yes, God doesn't pay every Friday night, but there are consequences to what we do. This is why Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 18, flee sexual immorality. Avoid it at all costs. A number of years ago, Sue and I had the occasion to be counselors in a summer camp over in Midwest Summer Camp over in Indiana, Jasonville, Indiana. And there was a fellow over there that was a counselor with us, he and his wife. And I remember sitting in the mess hall with him one night having a heated debate with him. He was raising 3 daughters, and he told me that he and his wife had purchased for his daughters, all 3 of them, birth control pills and devices. And he thought that was the loving and the kind and the good thing to do. And I'm telling him, friend, you are sending mixed signals to your girls. You're telling them on the one hand that they ought to wait until the day that they're married, and then on the other hand, you're telling them that you know they can't. So here is something that'll keep you from suffering the consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, flee sexual immorality. There are consequences. You're sinning against your own body in addition to sinning against God. It's an illusion to think there are no consequences. Continuing to talk about this, let's turn the page and talk about homosexuality, which is another form of fornication. The homosexual community today is trying to get us, and I'm going to tell you something, it's working with some Christians, trying to get us to believe that they are engaging in normal behavior. You see, that's where it began. They're wanting for us to accept that as a normal behavior. And they wanted, they sort of pass this along well, I just want you to accept me as I am. No, that's not what they want. They don't want me to just simply to tolerate what they do. They're wanting me to openly embrace that. Are there any consequences to this? Are there any consequences to this? You take the WNBA. You realize that in the WNBA that there are more than 90% of those female players that are professed lesbians. And we're pushing our daughters into doing that. We're pushing our daughters into playing those kinds of games and putting in hopes that one day they can make it to the WNBA. Are there not consequences to this behavior? Indeed, there are consequences to this behavior. I'm going to tell you something about the epidemic of HIV and AIDS, ladies and gentlemen. Do you realize that the homosexual community composed about 2% of the population? I know you thought it was 50. But it composes 2% of the American population, maybe even a little below that. But do you realize that in that 2% are 66% of all HIV cases? Is there consequences to this behavior? Absolutely there is. This is why Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 9 that sodomites and homosexuals shall not have their part in the kingdom of God. It's unrighteousness. There are consequences to this. Let's turn the page. Let's think about consequences as far as the use of drugs is concerned. You notice in this past election how many states have voted in the use of medicinal marijuana. That's just a gateway. That's just to get it accepted. But I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it goes beyond the use of marijuana. There's heroin use, and cocaine use, and methamphetamines. And all of these are available, and all of these are looked upon as just, no different than alcohol. And again, it's just part of our culture. Folks, let me tell you something. There's no free ride in this. There's no free ride in this drug use. And I tell you, it's becoming more and more prevalent. There's no question about that. But I got to tell you, there's no free ride in this. I got word just a few years ago of my first cousin's 24-year-old daughter who was found in a hotel room, overdosed with Oxycontin. I went to her funeral. And I'm going to tell you something. There's no free ride in this. This is something that's happening on a wholesale basis. You know, do you realize that drug overdose is the second leading cause of accidental death among young people? Behind automobile accidents, hundreds daily die as a result of drug overdose. Remember what happened to Lamar Odom just a while back, maybe not even a few years ago, when he was found unconscious with a drug overdose in a brothel in Nevada? You know, there are consequences to this. We can't live here expecting to have a free ride. Let's turn the page. What about the illusion of a free ride when it comes to the use of alcohol? Alcohol is packaged as sophisticated and as fun and as glamorous. And people every 1st of February, they gather around the television set and they watch the Super Bowl. And some of the commercials that are the best, they say, are the Budweiser commercials. And we just sit there and we watch all of that, and we just are in an accepting mood. We just are in a tolerating mood when it comes to things like that. It's packaged as sophisticated, it's packaged as glamorous, and it's packaged as fun. You see a television show, what can I get you a drink? You know, as if it is the common thing to do. But I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it is neither sophisticated, it is neither the thing to do, and we can look at that and we can say, you know what, if we could just get behind the reality of that and see how it really is, we can see that we've been living and believing an illusion. I want to note with you something that the proverb writer writes in Proverbs chapter 23, and I want you to listen carefully to his description of this. He said, who has woe, who has sorrow, who has contentions, who has complaints, who has wounds without cause, who has redness of eyes, those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine. You know, I tell people, and I'm not proud of this, not in any kind of way, shape, manner, or form. I wasn't raised by Christian parents. I never went to a gospel meeting when I was growing up in my life. Until after I was married with 2 children, my wife and I became Christians. I know what it's like to see alcohol and alcohol use. I mentioned my sister the other evening that I buried back in 2012. My sister was a recovering alcoholic. It had been since she was in her early 20s. I know what alcohol will do. I can speak to you firsthand what alcohol will do. And the Bible tells us who has redness of eyes, who has woe, and who has misery. I have put my brother-in-law to bed many times when he would come in so beaten up from having been in a fight somewhere in a bar. Blood all over him, and I'd wash him off and put him to bed. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly. At the last it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. You know, back in Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 1, he says, wine is a mocker. He didn't say the one who drinks wine is a mocker. He said wine, the very ingredients in wine, the very properties in wine is a mocker. And he said strong drink is a brawler. He didn't say those who engage in strong drink tend to become brawlers. He said the inherent properties in strong drink is a brawler. This is what God has to say about it. There's nothing sophisticated. There's nothing fun. There's nothing glamorous about that. And I'm going to tell you, my friends, drunk driving deaths on the highway account to 32% of all accidents, fatal accidents on the highway. And do you realize here in West Virginia that 27% of the people that are killed in highway accidents are because of drunk driving? Don't tell me there are no consequences to the choices. There are profound consequences. By the way, I want to put a picture up to show you that not everybody who is involved in a drunk driving accident dies. Some are permanently scarred and disfigured because of the choices that somebody had made. Drunkenness, ladies and gentlemen, drunk driving, and all that's involved in the drinking of alcoholic beverages, as I believe condemned by Almighty God. Listen to how Peter expresses it in 1 Peter chapter 4 rather, and verse 3. He said, "For we have spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles when we walked in lewdness, lust, drunkenness, revelries, and even drinking parties," he said. Just getting by, just having a drink, just drinking parties. He said, you know what? That ought not be among Christian people. That ought not be named among the people of God. It's just an illusion to think that there are no consequences to the choices we make. Let's turn the page and talk about families. Let's talk about the breakdown of the family. Sometimes we think, it doesn't matter the choices that I make when my children are young. I can be, I'm going to wait till I get a little older to become real serious about the church. I'm going to wait till I get these bills paid off and I get through. And you know what? Before long, our children are grown up, and then we get serious about church, and suddenly we find that our children are not at all serious about serving God. And we think there are no consequences to the choices that we've made. Listen, God intends. And I like the way that Joshua expresses it. Joshua 24 and verse 15. Joshua said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." I want to speak to every daddy in this building tonight, every father and every grandfather. How many of you gentlemen tonight have the moral courage to stand up and say that for your family? I'm going to make two choices. Number one, it's going to involve me. As for me, I will serve God. I don't care what anybody else is doing. As for me, I'm going to serve God. But how many of us are going to second step in that and use patriarchal authority here? As for me and my house, my sons, my daughters, and my wife, we're going to serve God. This is what we're going to serve. We're going to be at Bible study. We're going to get our lessons together. We're going to clean up our watching habits on television. We're going to clean up the way that we look at things and listen to things. As for me and my house, we're going to serve God. How many of you fathers are willing to do that? Can I get some commitments out of you this evening? This is how we're going to live in this family. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but rather bring them up." This is our obligation, daddies. Bring them up in the nurture and in the admonition of the Lord. That is our responsibility. I can't shove that over to my wife. I can't push that off to the elders and the preachers at the local church. I can't do that. That's my responsibility. And if I'm not living up to my responsibility, there's a breakdown in this family unit. God expects me to lead my family in devotions and in study and in worship and service to God. This is what I'm called upon to do. I'm going to tell you something. There's a passage that means a great deal to me that's recorded in 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 15. Paul says in writing to Timothy, he says, from childhood. Let me tell you a little bit about that word childhood. It translates an interesting Greek word known as brephos. And that word brephos can mean an infant. It can mean a toddler. It can mean a child. As a matter of fact, it is often even used in reference to the child that is not yet born, that is residing in the womb of his mother. But Paul says to Timothy that from childhood, from brephos, you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise unto salvation, which is by faith in Christ Jesus. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here is the conclusion. If I want my children to be raised to know the Lord and to accept the teaching of Christ and to become a Christian and to love and to serve Him, I better begin when that child is an infant. I can't wait. I can't just dawdle along as though there are no consequences to this. Why do you think Timothy turned out the way that he did? Because of the genuine faith that was in his mother and his grandmother. and as a result of the teaching of the Scriptures was also found in Him. Without God guiding and solidifying our families, we're on the road to demise and we're on the road to destruction. Why do you think there is so much fighting, so much infighting in families? Between a husband and a wife and children just going into the other room and just hiding because they hate to hear what mom and dad are doing over and over again. And the children are the very ones that suffer because of that. We think there is no consequences in the choices that we make. When families begin to fall up and fall apart, these precious children are put right in the middle and they're going to have to choose. Do I go with Dad or do I go with Mom? Is Dad right about this or is Mom right? And these children are so young and tender and inexperienced, they have no way of coping with such as that. And they often fall into the pit of saying, it must be my fault. One of the saddest stories that was ever told to me was told to me by a retired pilot for United Airlines. He was telling me that one time he was on a flight from Philadelphia to somewhere in Colorado, perhaps Denver. And he said that this was back at a time when United would let unaccompanied children ride along and the attendants would look after them. And he said there was a little boy and his little sister. The little boy about 6, the little girl about 3. And they were going to leave Mom and Stepdad, and they were going to fly out to be with Dad and Stepmom in Colorado. And he said they got situated on the plane. And he said suddenly they had some problems with that plane, so they had to disembark and get on another plane. So this pilot, who was a Christian, an elder in the church, he said, I told the attendants, don't worry about these children. I will take them to the new airport. And so he said he was walking down the concourse and he was holding the hand of the little boy. And he said the little boy was doing his best to play the part of a protective big brother. And he said I was leading the little boy's hand and he had hold of the little girl's hand. And he said as we walked toward that plane, the little girl began to pull back. He said, I don't want to. And the little boy turned and said to his little sister, he said, it'll be okay. Maybe she won't be this time. The little boy looked up at the pilot. And he said, you know, my mommy and daddy are divorced. And he said, it's my fault because I went. You think there are no consequences to selfish behavior? God said He hates divorce for it covers His garment with violence. I think of the pain and the hurt and the anguish that is upon a generation of young people because mothers and fathers do not have the moral integrity to live up to the commitment that they made to one another and to God. There are consequences to our behavior, and if we believe that we can make choices and we can live a life without paying for what we do and what we say and the way that we live, we are, ladies and gentlemen, living an illusion. It is not real. Jesus said, what God has joined together, let not man separate. Paul calls those who do this in Romans 1 and verse 31 covenant breakers. And he says those who commit such things are worthy of death. Bill is going to come due. We're going to have to pay the piper one of these days. Believing that there is a free ride is grasping for the wind. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God. Keep His commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or whether evil. There are consequences. There are consequences to the choices that we've made. There is no free ride. To believe otherwise is to believe an illusion. I want to close this evening like I've been closing the other lessons, by pointing out that this idea of living an illusion is just like buying into what the beauty industry offers to us as reality. We see all these glamour shots. We see all of these glamorous women. And our young girls are, they want to be like them. They want to look like them. And they get so dissatisfied with the way they look because their figures are not that way. And their face is not that way. And their complexion is not that way. And their hair is not that way. And you see these beautiful women and you say, well, if I could just like that. Well, let me tell you something. You've got to remove all of that, ladies and gentlemen, because it is nothing but an illusion to get you to buy into their products. And this is what the world is doing. It is offering us an illusion to get us to buy into what it is that Satan is selling. Don't buy the illusion. There is no such thing as free will. Maybe it's time for you to make a decision that you're going to get serious about serving God. You're going to stop playing. You're going to stop just toying with this idea. You're going to mean business beginning tonight. You believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and you're willing to repent of your sins, confess your faith in Him. You can be baptized in water tonight for the remission of your sins. You can be raised and walk with Jesus in life. But I would be willing to say, and while there may be some here tonight that need to obey the gospel just like I've described, I'm persuaded that there are some here tonight that are looking upon their lives and the choices that they've been making, the decisions that they've made, and realize I need to make some corrections. Tonight I'm going to do it. Tonight I'm going to ask God to forgive me. Tonight I'm going to return to my first love. Tonight I'm going to ask these good brothers and sisters to pray for me. Help me go to heaven. You need to repent publicly of sins in your life, please. We're willing to help you in any kind of way that we can. You're subject to heaven's call. Why don't you come right now together and say,